Lots of birds live side by side with us. In fact, many of them rely on our houses and gardens to provide them with nesting sites. Sparrows, starlings and blue tits will nest in holes in buildings, but they'll quite often use natural nest sites as well, like holes in trees. But there is one group of birds that rely on us more than others, and they quite literally build their homes on our houses, and that's the swallow family. Everyone enjoys seeing the first swallows of summer. It's amazing to think that these little birds fly to Scotland from South Africa where they spend the winter. Swallows have big long tail streamers, they have blue plumage on their back and wings, and they have light coloured underparts, and if you're lucky enough to get close to a swallow, you'll see that it has a red bib and forehead as well. Swallows nest in barns and sheds close to open fields where they can feed for insects. In fact, their common name is actually the barn swallow. Now you can see the nest here is cup-shaped and it's made from mud that the swallows have gathered from puddles. Now they mix this mud with saliva to form a building cement. And this nest here has 3 chicks in it, and from the time they hatch until they fly is only 3 weeks. And I think the chicks in this nest are only a couple of days away from their maiden flight. If you've ever looked up at a group of swallows feeding on insects and thought to yourself, some of them look a little bit different, then they probably are. You're probably looking at house martins. House martins have blue plumage on their back and white underparts as well, but they don't have the long tail streamers like the swallow. They have a slightly forked tail and they tend to feed much higher up than swallows. Up until the 1800s, the house martin was regarded as a cliff nesting species, nesting in caves and underneath rock overhangs. But since that time, they've adapted to man-made buildings, usually nesting underneath the eaves of residential houses. The house martin is now more closely associated with man than any other bird. Here we can see the difference between the two mud nests. Above my head you'll see a swallow nest, which is an open-topped cup-shaped nest, and on the eaves of the house there's a house martin's nest which looks like a little igloo of mud with an entrance hole quite close to the top. This nest would have taken about 2 weeks for the house martins to construct, and they will repair it and reuse it in subsequent years. Just like the swallows, the house martins have 2 lots of chicks in a breeding season, and it's amazing to think that the chicks from the first nest will help to feed the chicks from the second brood. Sand martins are very similar to their bird cousins the house martin, but they nest in quite different places. Sand martins nest in sandy banks next to rivers and ponds, and you don't tend to get them where people live. In fact, even when they're feeding, they tend to avoid built-up areas. Sand martins, like house martins and swallows, are summer visitors to Scotland from the Sahel region in Africa. Sand martins are brown in colour and they nest in tunnels in sandy banks in small colonies. And it helps in this situation if you get on with your neighbours, and sand martins do. Sand martins do everything together. They nest together, they feed together, they roost together, and they migrate together. Here you can see 2 sand martin chicks jostling with each other at the entrance to the tunnel. They're waiting on the parents coming back with food they've collected over the River Avon. This is a sign that the young birds are about to make their first flight out over the water. And it's quite a dangerous time for these wee birds, and let's hope it doesn't end in a splash. It's amazing to think that these young chicks, as well as swallow chicks and house martin chicks, will be making their first migration to Africa in about 2 months' time. This is an incredible journey that will take them down through France, over the Pyrenees, through Spain to the north of Africa, and then south down over the Sahara Desert to their wintering grounds. So there we have it. I hope you've enjoyed this brief introduction to the swallow family. That's the house martin, the sand martin and the swallow itself. If you'd like to encourage these birds to nest in your own homes, why not log on to the RSPB website and get information on artificial nests that you can put onto your houses. You can even report your sightings of martins and swallows for a new UK and Ireland bird atlas that's going to be produced from 2011. Log on to birdatlas.net, and there you'll be able to report any sightings of these birds and any other birds that might be of interest in your area. So from the banks of the Avon, I hope you've enjoyed being with us today. Cheerio!